call it Tales. I saw her upon nearer view, a spirit, yet a woman too, her household motions light and free, and steps of virgin liberty, a countenance in which did meet sweet records, promises as sweet, a creature not too bright or good, for human nature's daily food. For transient sorrows, simple wiles, praise, blame, love, kisses, tears, and smiles. Hello and welcome to Storytime with Isto. You have reached chapter 12 of Tarot Tales, a weekly gathering where I tell a little known fairy tale based on a randomly drawn tarot card from the week before. Those of you that were with me last week know that I drew the Queen of Cups, which is this beautiful card of this monarch that is standing, or sitting, I should say, contemplative on this stone crown looking out into the ocean. And I found way more write ups about this card online than I normally do when I'm looking at these cards week to week. And I loved everything that I found. First of all, this is one of the only cups that is actually closed, which is really interesting and indicates this idea of thinking about like subconscious feelings, stuff that you're not fully picking up on. We're also on the precipice of land here, looking out into the ocean. The ocean representing this idea of feelings and emotions, and the land being more solid and rational thought. And so we notice that the queen is actually not touching the water at all and looking out beyond this kind of closed water bearing vessel. So it's this got this kind of contemplative resolve to it, looking out and kind of understanding the emotions. We also have a whole bunch of water god-like symbolism kind of all around here, which is really lovely. Now, all of this represents this idea of caregiving, counseling, taking care of oneself, taking care of one another, being introspective, really being the best version of your psychological health, being so on top of yourself that you can't help but care for others. And if we reverse the card, as always, it means that we're trying to do the same thing, but we're not quite hitting it. So that might mean that we are dealing with things like manipulation, giving so much of yourself that you are becoming a martyr or feeling like a martyr, giving yourself so much that you aren't able to maintain healthy boundaries. You're not living a healthy life. You're feeling really insecure, overly dependent, yada, yada, yada. So there's actually a lot of really good fairy tales to deal with this upside down version of the card. But I found a really lovely story for the right side up meaning, this kind of powerful feminine quality that is representing strength, reflectiveness, and caring. So I'm excited to share that with you. But before we get to that, let's take a look at our beverage book for the week. I'm really trying to up my marker game. I've gotten some of the drawings down here, and you'll notice it's the same crown, some of the symbols, you know. For our drink this week, we have this drink called Canelazo, which I've got right here. It's our first warm beverage that we're trying out, which is challenging because I'm wearing this and it's quite hot. But I'm really excited about it. It's been making our whole house smell delightful. And for those of you that don't drink alcohol, we have the Sunrise Slurp, which is kind of like a peach mimosa. So I hope that you are enjoying those in the future or right now. And regardless of whether or not you are joining me with a beverage, I am just happy that you are here, and to you I say cheers. It may just be that there is a cup of sugar in this, but that is the most delicious warm drink. This is better than a hot toddy. It's got aguardiente in it, which I took a shot of before this show. It's got this kind of anise flavor, and it's mixed with cinnamon and sugar, and it's just that's good. You all should try that. Where was I? Right. Well, let's get on with the show. Before I dive into it, I must ask, I'm trying to figure out how to continue to grow this little art project. And two small ways that you could really help me out is by liking this video and subscribing to this channel on this account or as many accounts as you have access to. If you're joining me live, please pop some comments in the chat. And if you're watching this after the fact, a comment would help a lot. Without further ado, Chapter 12, In Search of the Magic Lake. 500 years ago, near Cuzco, capital of the Incas, there lived a girl named Ampata with her parents and her two older brothers. Her family was poor and farmed the land as best that they could to serve their emperor, the Sun King. So we'll pause right here, right now, because some of you are geography buffs and you're thinking to yourselves, Isto, you told me this was a story about Ecuador, but you just referenced Cuzco. How stupid are you? And the answer is very. But I do have an explanation for why I made this kind of confusing connection. So those of you that were with me last week know that we were in the Isle of Mocha right around here. And we're coming all the way up here to this tiny little country, Ecuador, just north of Peru. And it's kind of hard to see. So I have given us a little bit of a larger map here. So we've got Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, Peru. The shaded part represents the Amazon. And then this little turtle out here represents the Galapagos, which I did not realize was part of Ecuador. Huh, fun fact. But Ecuador itself was had plenty of life in it up until the Incas started expanding. And around 1463, the Incan Empire made its way up into Ecuador. And so there's actually a lot of commonality in terms of culture, drinks, and stories up and down that reign. It's still a little confusing that this story was listed as being attributed to Ecuador, but that would explain what was happening. Some other fun facts about the Incas. So the Incas were one of the most advanced civilizations in the pre-Columbian era. And unfortunately, as we tend to do, the colonialists, specifically Francisco Pizarro, came here through Panama and made his way down to the Incan Empire around 1532. And you may have noticed that I referenced this idea of a Sun King. Sun King was the other name was Sapa Inca, which is son of the sun. And an Inca is just another word for kind of like a king. So the kingly monarchy, it would be like the monarchy, the Incan Empire. Francisco Pizarro captured one of the very last Sun Kings, and that Sun King offered a ransom of a whole bunch of gold and jewels to fill the prison that he was being captured in, and to double that. And he fulfilled that promise, and then he was still violently murdered by the Spanish. Anyway, so then Ecuador was under Spanish rule for a number of years up until around 1820 when they started going for their own independence. And then it's been just kind of slowly taken over by them since then. The only other fun fact I have for you about Ecuador is that it actually is the same word for equator because it's only like 26 miles south of the equator. Oh, no, I do have another fun fact about Ecuador. So I'm trying to figure out to get more in touch with the different cultures that I'm going to go and look at. So both of these images are from Ecuadorian painters. This one is from Gilberto Almeida, and it's actually like really beautiful. He's got a lot of different, it's a very similar style, but I really recommend going and taking a look at it. And then this is by an artist named Oswaldo Guayasamín. Apologies if I butchered that, but also really beautiful stuff. So I recommend you going and checking it out. All right. That's the lay of the land. We're kind of in Ecuador. We're kind of in Peru. We're dealing with the Incas. Let's keep going. One day, the family learned that the health of the prince, who had not been well since birth, had worsened. The Sun King feared for the very life of his only son. Our only hope, sire, said the court magician, is for your son to drink the water from the magic lake at the end of the earth, where the sky dips so low that it touches the lake's water and charges it with a magical healing power. The Sun King announced far and wide that whoever could bring him water from the magic lake at the end of the earth would be rewarded by joining the royal family. Now, to the Incan people, gold and jewels were so abundant that they had no more value than a barrel of corn. It was land and the honor of joining the royal Inca family that was far greater a treasure. But for Ampata's two older brothers, it was the opportunity to serve their Sun King that inspired them to beg their parents to allow them to go. "We know we can find the magic lake," they insisted. "The end of the earth is too far," said the father, crossing his arms. And the mother agreed, added, "Panthers! Boa constrictors! Falls from rocky ledges! Who knows the dangers that could befall you?" "But our prince would die without the water from the magic lake," they cried. "We must try." Eventually, the parents relented, and Ampata's brothers embarked upon the journey. They traveled for months, trekking through endless mountain ranges, each time thinking that the mountains they were climbing must be the very last one on Earth, and just beyond that would lie the magic lake. But this did not happen. One day, they climbed yet another mountain that they had hoped was the last one on Earth, only to discover the dozens more summits were beyond the peak in front of them. One of the brothers said, discouraged, "We're not gonna find the magic lake." "I know," said the other, panting with exhaustion. "This is hopeless. What should we do? Look, the harvest is coming, and our parents need us back at the farm. Let's take some water from this mountain lake back to the prince. Who knows? We're far from Cusco. Maybe the water will help cure him." Now they had their doubts, but scooped the jar full of the mountain lake water, sealed it, and presented it to the Sun King at the castle. But when the court magician poured their water into his flask, it sizzled and evaporated in a flash. The court magician frowned. "My magic flask holds only water from the magic lake," he said. "This water is fake. These men are imposters." "How dare you try to trick the royal family?" bellowed the Sun King. "Throw them in prison." News of the young men's fate spread throughout the land. With her brothers languishing in jail, Ampata pleaded with her parents to let her go in search of the magic lake. "Absolutely not," said Ampata's parents. "We will have no children left at home." But Ampata implored them, saying it was the only way to win her brother's release from prison. And at last, with a sigh, her parents agreed, handed her a bag of toasted corn and nuts, and bade their youngest child farewell. On Ampata's first night, she climbed the trees to spend night in safety, out of the dangers of the forest floor. Now, the crook of a tree trunk is hardly a comfortable bed, but sleeping in the tree can bring unexpected benefits. The next morning, Ampata watched bemused as a pair of scarlet macaws circled overhead. When they flew about, she chewed some toasted corn and nuts, and when the macaws alighted on the next branch, she spread some treats out for them. Exclaimed the macaws as they helped themselves to the treats. "What is a human girl doing in the trees?" Ampata told them her story of the prince's mysterious illness, her brother's failed attempt to save him, and her determination to find the magic lake. "You will never get there on your own," said one of the macaws. Caw! 2 birds bobbed their beaks and flew to the edge of the limb. After a few moments, one of them turned to her and said,
"We enjoyed your tasty treats, and we know how to help you."
The macaws rubbed their backs together in a kind of dance until 3 feathers fell down. They picked them up and flew them over to Empata. Said one macaw, setting the feathers in her lap.
"Ah, these 3 feathers have golden magic about them. Hold them together as a fan. They will take you wherever you want to go, and they will protect you from danger. Caw, caw!"
She spread the 3 feathers and tied the bottom of the fan with a ribbon from the wool of her hair. "Oh, I cannot thank you enough," she said to the 2 macaws, holding the fan before her. She said, "If you please, will you take me to the magic lake at the end of the earth?" And as if she were a feather herself, Empata was lifted far above the trees and whisked to the mountains. Thousands of feet below her, the snow-topped peaks of the Andes, the world's longest mountain range, raced by, and Empata nervously clutched her fan. At last, she lowered ever so gently onto the very last peak. All right, quick pause to talk about the Andes. So, as the story just referenced, the Andes is the longest mountain range in the world. And I was thinking, okay, well, I don't know how to reference that. And so I was like, oh, what's it like next to the Rocky Mountains? Turns out the Rocky Mountains is actually the 3rd longest mountain range in the world. The 2nd is the Southern Great Escarpment in Africa. But the Andes themselves have 3 distinct climate zones: tropical, dry, and wet, and they go across 7 different countries. But my favorite fun fact about the Andes is that there is a peak called Chimborazo Peak, which is actually the furthest peak from the core of the Earth. And that is because as the Earth is spinning, as you may see here, I tried to draw, the rotation of the Earth expands the sphere of the globe such that this peak would be further away from the core despite it not technically being the tallest mountain on the planet. The final fun fact I have for you is that the Andes is most likely derived from the ancient Incan word anti, which represents east, because it's on the eastern part of South America. These are your fun facts about the Andes. At last, she was lowered ever so gently onto the very last peak. There, before her, sparkled the magic lake. Indeed, where the sky touched the water and the magic lake fixed and sparked. Empata knew she had reached the end of the earth. She tucked the fan into her waistband. Then, suddenly, from the woods slithered a giant rattlesnake many times larger than she was. Shaking, it rattled and flicked its red tongue, and it seemed as though it was flying towards her. Horrified, Empata snatched up the fan before her face, closed her eyes, and before her there was a loud clump. She lowered the fan just above her nose and was amazed to see that the giant rattlesnake had collapsed to the ground. The next moment, before she could think, a huge red scorpion snapping its front claws surprised her from behind. It scampered towards her on its many legs so quickly that she barely had time to raise the fan, though as soon as she did, the sound of its rushing along the ground toward her stopped. As she turned around, the scorpion lay on its back as if asleep. Carefully stepping around the scorpion and the rattlesnake, Empata headed down to the shore of the magic lake. When suddenly she heard a low humming that started behind her. Spinning around, she saw what looked like a low, dark cloud. Soon, the humming became louder, and the dark cloud became bigger and darker. When she realized with horror that a swarm of ferocious army ants was about to surround her. Quickly, she shut her fan in front of her face, not knowing if the feathers could protect her from so many ants coming from so many different directions. And yet, in the next few seconds, no ants bit her feet or climbed her legs. Trembling, she peeked through the feathers. The swarm of deadly army ants lay dead all around her. And we just talked about 3 really cool animals. And I could do a full dissertation on a cardboard card about each of them, but I'm just going to give you one little fun fact about each of them. So, rattlesnakes, um, each time they shed their skin, they get a new rattle at the base of their tail. Though you actually can't tell their age by the rattle because little parts of it break off as time goes on. Another sadder fun fact is that when I was growing up in Oklahoma, I attended a thing called a rattlesnake roundup where we did a lot of really nasty things to rattlesnakes. And so I'd like to apologize to the general rattlesnake population. That wasn't cool. I'm sorry. Scorpions, their little stinger is sharp at this one point, and it actually has it's concentrated with these things called metalloproteins, which have zinc in them, which I thought was so metal that it was actually metal at the end of that stinger, like Wolverine. But then when I looked up metalloproteins, I realized that about half of all proteins are metalloproteins and make up our whole body. So I need to learn more about biology. And then my final fun fact is that army ants, you may already know this, but they actually don't have a nest. They're constantly moving around, and their queen is the largest and the coolest of all ant queens because if she dies, the entire colony dies, and she takes multiple lovers who come visit the nest or visit the swarm and then like disappear into the distance, which I also think is just very cool. It's also the largest queen ant of all of them. These have been your fun animal facts. And Potta kept the fan in front of her face as she hurried to the magic lake and with her other hand dipped the jar in the magic waters. And as soon as the jar was filled with the seal and sealed shut, she gripped the fan and said, right away, please, take me to the castle of the Sun King. Wind set change. The next moment, she was facing the Sun King's castle and its huge walls of interlocking cut stone. When she announced she had brought water from the magic lake, the girl was ushered upstairs to the sick prince's room. And Potta gave her jar to the court magician, who regarded her suspiciously. But when he poured the water from her jar into his magic flask, it did not sizzle or disappear. He smiled and glanced at her with excitement. He dipped his finger into the flask and let a few droplets fall onto the lip of the prince. The sick man's lips parted. His tongue flicked out for a moment to taste the water, and then his eyes opened. Everyone in the royal bedroom cheered, ha ha, and the prince smiled.
Oh, drink this, your highness.
And the court magician, handing him the flask with Ampatta's water from the magic lake. The prince took one gulp, and the color rushed back to his cheeks. I feel better, he said, sitting up. The Sun King was overjoyed. Oh, you did it, he exclaimed to Ampatta. You brought water back from the magic lake. She relayed her adventures, and the Sun King was impressed. You may live here and join the royal family, he said. If you please, sir, said Ampatta, may I ask 3 favors instead?
Of course, whatever you want.
First, would you release my 2 brothers from prison? I'm sure they're sorry for their mistake and would like nothing better than a second chance to serve you better again.
Oh, consider it done, said the Sun King. What else?
I'd like to return these 3 magic feathers to my friends, the scarlet macaws. Instantly, the fan pried itself free of her waistband and shot upward into the air, quickly spun around, and flew out an empty window.
Well, it looks like that got taken care of too, smiled the Sun King. What is your 3rd wish?
Quick pause about the logic of this story. I could have changed it, but I'd rather complain about it, which is that if the Sun King had the power to make that happen, then he could have fixed his own problems earlier in this story. And if he didn't, that technically doesn't count as a wish. So I feel like she should get another one, or he sucks. But also, I question her judgment of wanting to return the fan, which the Macaws didn't seem to have an issue with her having, and seems to be very powerful. But I may just be evil. Anyway, would you grant my parents large flocks of llamas, alpacas, vicuñas, and land enough to herd them so that they will not be poor in their old age, and so my brothers and I can take care of them? Okay, final vocab word. We just used a word that you may have not heard of, which is vicuña. Vicuña, you're breaking my heart. Okay, so a vicuña is of a type of animal called a camelid. So a camelid has two genuses, Camelus, which are for all the camels that you know, all the you little camel freak, and llamas, which include the vicuñas, llamas, alpacas, and guanacas. All of them are llamas. You may have only heard of alpacas and llamas. But the vicuña in particular is the state animal of Peru and is considered to be an ancestor of the domesticated alpaca. Now, their wool is incredibly expensive because it only can be harvested once every 3 years. And when I say incredibly expensive, I mean that only Incan royalty was allowed to wear it. And I looked it up today, and it is still very expensive. It is $1,500 to get a vicuña scarf. And give me a guess in the chat for how much a vicuña coat might cost. A scarf is $1,500. What's your guess for how much a coat costs? 3, 2, 1. $20,000. Also, this animal is endangered because it is so valuable in 1974. Oh, humanity. All right, so my dear girl, I'm glad you grant this on one condition, that you promise to visit us often at the castle as our treasured friend. And Pata agreed. And she returned to live at home with her rescued brothers and her parents, where she lived out the remainder of her days comfortably and happily. The end. Now, there's actually two endings to this story. The original ending, the one that I took most of the text from, has her actually become a queen, which is more fitting for this card because she goes back and she visits the prince so often that they fall in love and get married. But I always struggle when I'm learning about all of this, all of these cards, and I find these references to things like maternality and femininity, which is kind of this reinforcing metaphor. This idea that like only women or feminine characters can be caring and need to be the caregivers. And so I don't know. I liked this story better because she doesn't need a man. She values her own thing. She's got her own independence, and I love that. Which brings me to my gratitudes for this week. First of all, gratitude to Emily. I'm so sorry I didn't use your fan. I just didn't work. But thank you for your community help. And then my gratitude in the vein of this card, I was really trying to think about this idea of kind of caregiving and what it means to me and kind of how it comes. And so my gratitude is a little weird. It's to Marty P. Seligman, who was considered the founder of positive psychology. He wrote this book called Flourish. It's his most recent book. And then Laurie Santos, who hosts a podcast called The Happiness Lab and also has a really fantastic course on Coursera called The Science of Well-Being. And the reason that I'm choosing them is because they've done a lot of work to talk about how we can processify and calculate ways that we can be happier as human beings. And it turns out that, caregiving shouldn't just be isolated to one subgroup of humanity because doing kind things for other people, caring for other people, and taking care of ourselves are one of the biggest ways that we can get happiness boosts for ourselves. And that's kind of what this card meant for me. And that's why I chose this story in this specific way. So I recommend you check out their work. All right, next week we have 4 wands right here. And if this card looks super happy and joyful, it is, but we drew it upside down. So I have an absolutely brutal story for you next week from Nigeria. It's a really beautiful story. I was so excited when I found it, and I can't wait to share it with you. So I hope to see many of you next week. Please bring a friend. Thank you for being here. And with that, May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you treat yourself with love and respect. May you continue to grow and find the strength to persevere through the painful parts of growth. May you find inspiration all around you. And may you find peace. Until next week, thank you for joining me this week. Bye, y'all.